Welcome to the Beyond the Music podcast. My name is Ian O'Donnell, and I'm here with Brian Smith.
Hello.
On today's episode, we're going to be breaking down How to Train Your Dragon. We're going to talk about some of our first impressions on the movie and the soundtrack, and then we're going to explain what the four main themes are. And from there, we're going to break them down further and talk about different ways the themes are used and how they're kind of mixed with each other throughout the course of the film.
I remember when I first saw How to Train Your Dragon, it didn't leave that much of an impression on me. I just assumed it was another animated kids movie, and I saw it. I was like, that was fun, and I didn't really think about it much. And for some reason, Test Drive ended up on my iTunes, and I would listen to that over and over. I thought it was just this amazing theme, and it never occurred to me before I started studying film scores that these themes are used throughout the movie. So I love this theme, Test Drive, but it never occurred to me that it would appear in other places in How to Train Your Dragon. I just assumed it was like a band's album where it's just a single contained song. It would never show up again. And then I listened to the soundtrack and I was just blown away. I had fresh ears to listen to it. It was just amazing.
Yeah, I had a similar experience with it because the first time I watched it, the track that stood out to me was Test Drive. And I got that song and it was like the only song I had from the soundtrack, and I would listen to it. And this was before I was really studying music a whole lot and composition for films and such. As I learned more about it, and I still liked this movie, and I watched it more and more, and I started to analyze it and kind of look at how the themes were used. It really is impressive
There's a way where you hear the theme on the surface, and we'll get into this, and then there's other ways that as you dissect it, it's just used in so many unique ways that it adds a layer of depth that I didn't think was there before when I first heard it.
Yeah, it's a great soundtrack, and the more and more I dug into it after I initially got interested, I was really impressed with it, and it's to this day one of my personal favorites.
One of the things that always stands out to me is the quality and how many quality tracks there are. Usually in a theme, you might have one theme you really love, and that's it. Where in How to Train Your Dragon, there's 5 or 6 themes that are just amazing and always stick with you. We'll be going over at least 4 today, and I think that's what helps put it in the cultural lexicon. Is it's just so many good themes that you can listen to. It never gets tiring.
Now we're going to go ahead and introduce the 4 main themes used throughout the film. The first one is the theme for the Vikings and for the village of Berk. It kind of represents them in a couple different ways, which we'll talk about more, but here is what that theme sounds like.
And the next theme is the romance theme. This is, you hear it in Romantic Flight. We consider it Hiccup and Astrid's theme, and this is what it sounds like.
Then we have Toothless and Hiccup, their theme, or we also consider this to be the main theme. This is what you hear during Test Drive, and it's peppered throughout the film in lots of different variations and such. But here it is, the main theme, as you'll hear it most commonly throughout the film.
And the final one we'll go over is the Green Death. It is the Bad Dragons theme. It really only shows up in the latter half of the movie, but this is what it sounds like. All right, now that we've introduced the 4 main themes, we'll go ahead and get into what they mean. And we're going to start with the romance theme. It's played for Hiccup and Astrid, and it's in B major, as you heard. And my favorite part about this is it doesn't take place till halfway in the movie, where Astrid and Hiccup are taking a flight with Toothless. But it's actually introduced in the very beginning of the film in This Is Berk, in that cue. And it's played for comedy's sake. There's a scene where Astrid is in front of an exploding village and she's twirling her hair and the wind's blowing and her theme plays as Hiccup is kind of drooling, looking at her and starstruck. And it's played for comedy, and yet when you hear it again, it's this really beautiful, touching scene, and it just shows that the theme has so many ways that it can be played.
Right, that really stands out a lot. In the beginning, there's so many themes that are introduced during that first scene, but that theme in particular stands out because really the way it's instrumentated is it's these really high strings, which is common for like romantic tracks in movies in general. But it really stands out, and you don't really hear a lot of high string led melodies until their theme is reintroduced again in Romantic Flight.
There's another interesting thing where we consider the romance theme to be Astrid and Hiccup's theme, and the movie subtly hints at this. So when they're taking their flight, when the theme plays, only Astrid and Hiccup are shown on screen. So they're flying on Toothless, but he is not in the actual shot that you see in the film. And then they go to a wide shot where Toothless is in the shot, and they play Hiccup and Toothless's theme combined with it, and it's a brilliant way to show that they're all coming together as friends. And the other thing that really stood out theoretically to me is how, I don't want to say simple as a bad thing. It's simple in that it only uses all diatonic chords. Mm-hmm. So the original theme is in B major when you first hear it, and it's just a B major chord, a C sharp minor chord, E major, F sharp major, and G sharp minor. They're all diatonic to the B major, and there's a lot of this variance where it'll go the one chord to another chord back to the one chord. So that was 1 to the minor 2 back to the 1, 1 to the 4 back to the 1. The intro does this. 4, 1. So it starts 1, 4, 1. And it's just a great way to build a theme around a motif where you start on 1, go to another chord and come back, and the theme is built around that.
Right. Oftentimes simplistic themes, they come across as being more romantic anyways. They work better for those types of themes. Like in Married Life in the movie Up, it's actually a pretty simple melody.
Yeah.
And somehow that simplicity creates a more romantic sounding theme in general.
Yeah, that's just an F waltz, and you think it's this amazing, it's just based around F major.
There's really not much happening with it.
One of my favorite parts about the theme is it sticks strictly to Astrid and Hiccup. There's not a lot of variations, like you said, that where it represents other people or things. It's really just their theme, and I think there's an element that I love about that, where it's just their theme. It's nobody else's. And that's really the opposite compared to the next theme we're going to discuss, which is Hiccup and Toothless's theme.
Right, yeah, sort of the main theme. What's interesting about that is it's not just Toothless and Hiccup's theme. It also, because at the very end of the movie, you hear that theme playing, and it almost represents dragons and Vikings coming together. But, which is, of course, systemic from what happened between Toothless and Hiccup, so it kind of started there and then spread out, so you can see where the theme was naturally going.
You mentioned how it's heard at the end of the film. It's actually the very first thing you hear when the movie starts because the partial theme plays over the DreamWorks logo.
It's really heard throughout the film pretty much the whole time, especially the first half of the film when Hiccup and Toothless are kind of developing their relationship. You hear it a lot there. The best example of this theme being used is in Down Dragon, and this is in the scene where Hiccup had shot down Toothless and he finds him the next day. Because he goes to kill him, right? And he's having so much inner conflict. And we were talking about how it's you kind of get like a man versus self and a man versus man, or maybe nature, depending on
versus beast.
Yeah, so I guess nature. But anyways, there's lots of different things going on, storytelling, and the score here is fantastic because it mixes in that theme that you hear for Toothless and Hiccup, but it's in a minor key actually.
It's really a case study on how to take a theme and then play it in a minor key, like you said, or a major key, and form the melody around what the scene calls for.
Right. Oh, yeah, let me play it for you real quick so you can hear the contrast between what you heard at the beginning when it's in D major. Much different, and the instrumentation of it is kind of like a strings. It's very sad sounding. But there's lots of other themes going on in this scene too. You hear Berk theme there as well, because I mentioned there was like an element of man versus self. So you hear that Berk theme while he's kind of conflicted about, oh, I should be like the other Vikings, but then he also doesn't want to kill Toothless. So there's lots of
because when you hear the Berk theme, it's played at the beginning of the film. It's with all the villagers, so you associate Hiccup with the villagers of Berk. And so when that theme plays when he's trying to kill Toothless, or when he thinks he's supposed to kill Toothless, I should say, you subconsciously associate the village with the dragons, and there's that dichotomy of this is just what they're supposed to do. They're just supposed to kill each other.
But it's neat because the music is almost fighting back and forth with itself because you're hearing that other theme come in over it. It's a neat way of scoring it. There's actually another really interesting section in this scene after he decides he's not going to kill Toothless. He cuts him free and Toothless jumps on him, and you hear their theme again. But this case, it's in fifth mode harmonic minor, and it sounds really bizarre. It's played on a hurdy-gurdy, which is like a traditional folk instrument. It's like a violin, but it's on like you crank it, and it has like a rotating wheel that bows the string, but it also has a droning note, similar to like a bagpipe sort of sound. But let me go ahead and play that for you.
It's really that A sharp that brings out that fifth mode harmonic minor. You said it sounds weird and strange, and it's really that note that brings out the color of the scale. So it's like, is this evil? It's you just think there's something weird going on.
Yeah, it's really bizarre. It's usually in most films when it's used, or game soundtracks or whatever, it's used to kind of represent something like in the desert. It has a very Middle Eastern sound to it, and it was used, like we were talking about Uncharted not too long ago, it was used to when you see the desert, that same scale was. But it's used in this case, it's a little bit different. It's interesting. I think it's the way it's instrumentated, because it's on the hurdy-gurdy, which is a very, folk instrument kind of from that area of the world, that kind of European spot. But yeah, it has a very, I don't know, it's almost aggressive sounding. So it really fits that scene when he jumps on him, because you see like Toothless's eyes and he looks feral and everything. Yeah,
so you get this bizarre scale with this bizarre instrument, and you put them together and you get this really bizarre theme, and you already recognize it because it's played in fragments earlier, and you're like, well, what kind of theme is this? Where is it going? It's a great setup for what you hear later, which is the forbidden friendship, when they start to really get to know each other.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. I mean, you hear this theme. It really starts off at the beginning, because right after that, you get the scene where he's looking at the dragon book, because he's trying to learn more about the Night Furies. And then you get some more, you hear this theme again, but it's still not in that major key. It's still kind of in a minor. And it also has some strange instrumentation and such.
Yeah, so it's got this hammered dulcimer, which you might think it's a harpsichord, like I first did before we looked into it, but it's also a folk instrument. And these instrumentations really fit into Berk, the area that the movie takes place. It fits perfectly with the people. You would think these folk instruments would be, they'd gather around a fire and somebody might play some of these instruments.
Right. Yeah, it's cool. And it keeps it sounding mysterious and kind of foreign to what we are. It kind of plays on expectations. And at this point, the theme is still played in minor key, because it's still kind of mysterious and sort of spooky sounding. But then we go on to, like you're saying, forbidden friendship. And this is where their theme really develops a whole lot over this scene.
One of my favorite parts is, so we've heard their main theme in the major key. Forbidden friendship begins to sprinkle in the main theme throughout. So it's probably a 5-minute scene. You never hear the full theme, but you do hear the notes of the theme. So you start to associate this major sound with their friendship, and as it grows, the theme shortens, and so you hear it more fully.
And what's really interesting in this section is it uses like a lot of female choir in like upper register. And, you know, in the traditional sense, something big and low is kind of like scary or like it might attack you. Think about like a lion roaring, you know, you're like, oh, I'm gonna die. But then if you hear like a mouse squeaking, you're like, oh, it's a mouse, right? And so it makes you feel more at ease, kind of like there's no danger. So it's neat because it shows that they're not going to attack each other. It kind of makes everything sound peaceful in a way.
And you had a great observation about at the end of Forbidden Friendship, when it comes to a cadence, it doesn't actually resolve to the tonic like you would expect.
Right. It ends on the 5 chord, and it kind of shows that their friendship's coming together, but they're not like best friends like they are later on in the film.
And this is why you don't actually hear their main theme in Forbidden Friendship. Like you say, they are getting to know each other, but they're not complete yet as they are. And it's not until we get to Test Drive, that scene, that you actually hear their full main theme playing.
Right. Yeah, and again, this is the track that we both love a whole lot and what really got us initially interested in this soundtrack overall. It starts off with like this big, full symphonic hit, and you see them flying for the first time.
You hear this, it starts off with this low D on the brass section, and it's just, like, I get goosebumps even just thinking about it. It's beautiful, that D pedal tone with the melody over top. You can tell it's going somewhere. The scene, they're flying through the air. It's just beautiful.
It's great. And there's also that one scene that you mentioned. It actually has a key change in it. So after they start falling, once he finally catches control and he drops his sheet, it bumps it up a whole step rather to E major, and it plays the theme again. And at that point, it kind of takes it to the next level, and that's like the moment in the film where you know they're like inseparable best friends.
Yeah, you know, there's the scene where Hiccup gets ejected from his seat and they're falling, and the orchestra's just going nuts. The strings are just playing these scratches and all that. And, you know, when he throws away his card, like you said, and the main theme kicks in, it's a real subtle key change that I didn't even know it was a key change until, you know, we started breaking this down. It went from D major to E major. And the brilliant thing about this key change is that it's actually set up when it's in the original key of D major. The chord progression goes to E major at the end, so it's subtly priming you that we're about to get a key change, and then it goes up to E, and it gives the theme that more oomph, like you said, that it needs.
Yeah, and that's a really common thing you'll see producers do on just pop music tracks. It's almost like like a cliche that you're going to see in like things like country music. You hear it a whole lot. There's always that kind of like aha moment in a song where it just it like kicks up a notch, and that kind of matches it's not really a cliche here because you don't actually see that in film a whole lot, but it works perfectly in this scene because that is like just the pinnacle moment where you know that they're like tight, they're together.
There's some scores where it'll change keys, and it's stark where you can tell there's a key change. Not that it's bad, you just hear the abrupt key change, where this key change was masked by them falling and the orchestra is just going nuts. And so when it comes back, it's that much more impactful because you smoothly modulated to the new key.
So throughout the rest of the film, you hear the theme multiple times, like when towards the end of the film, you hear the theme in both major and minor keys, depending on the situation. For example, when Toothless gets trapped underwater. And you hear the theme mixed, actually, a whole lot with, like, the Berk theme towards the end, where you start to see people coming together and such. Especially in that final fight, you hear it there as well, mixed with even the Green Death theme, which will lead us on to some of these last themes we were talking about.
Yeah, so we'll get to the Berk theme. That we consider this the theme for the Vikings in the Village. And as we mentioned, it can be used in stark contrast to Hiccup and Toothless's theme, where the Berk theme is portrayed as we are the Vikings and anybody against us, we need to take them out. And as the movie goes on, it becomes more aggressive. So there's a scene where the Vikings have captured Toothless and they are trying to kill the dragons, and they pull up onto the beach, and Berk's theme is playing. It's really low register brass, and the melody changes in a way that Toothless's theme was the opposite, where at first is minor and you're like, oh, something's weird about it, and then it progresses to where it's major. This is the opposite, where it's a real happy, and then you get this low brass as they're going to kill the dragons, and you're like, something bad is about to happen. And it's a great example of the two themes going in different directions on the tone.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that's interesting. I didn't really notice that. It's a neat use of that theme. And it's, again, this theme is also peppered throughout the whole film. Just pretty much whenever Berk is on the screen. Oh, there's even scenes like when the kids are dragon training, especially for Astrid, whenever she has this moment where she's like, I'm gonna beat Hiccup. I'm gonna like get ahead. You always hear the theme play there. So it kind of shows that they're trying to be like the
And the funny part about that is, so we said that Berk's theme could be seen as them versus the dragons. So if they're fighting the dragons, what's the other theme that's playing during that scene is when Hiccup is trying to befriend Toothless. So you get their theme working, and that's really the section where those themes cross, as Berk is now the aggressive, we got to kill the dragons, and Toothless theme. So that's the meeting point where they change.
So the last thing we want to go over is the Green Death theme and how it's used. It's much like the romance theme. It's introduced at the beginning, and then you don't hear it again until halfway through the film. So you hear it at the beginning when Hiccup is talking about the different dragons and such, and then the next time you hear it is after Romantic Flight, when Toothless takes them to the dragon's den. And this is the first time you actually see Green Death, the bad dragon. And it shows that all the evil from the dragons is kind of systemic from this hive mind kind of controlling them.
Yeah, you get that in the scene where they fly into the mountain, and you start to hear Green Death's theme develop, and the dragons are dropping in their offerings, and you start to piece together what's really going on. And it's a great way to have a theme play, and then the story introduces the element that the theme is also introducing at the same time. It's a brilliant synergy on a way to have both the music and the story connect at a point and really drive it home.
And the way this theme is instrumentated is it's an extremely low, heavy brass, which matches a gigantic dragon and such. Yeah. So it's pretty, but that kind of stands out. Other than the scene when the Vikings are storming the beach, that extremely low register, kind of like tubas and that sort of low brass trombones, like bass trombones and such. Yeah, that's really the only time you're hearing themes that low.
And it's interesting that the dragons don't necessarily have a theme of their own. We can argue if Toothless is that his theme, but for the most part, the dragons don't have a theme until now, and it's for this evil villain. It's they're misunderstood throughout the movie, and this is the personification of, hey, this evil dragon. This is their theme, even though they don't follow along with what the Green Death means.
So now we're going to go on to the last section and talk about some of our final thoughts about the film. So what were some of yours?
Just how well the themes interact with each other. There's so many, we covered a few today, and there's so many examples of themes interacting with each other where you'll get one theme and then it switches to another theme, and it'll play another one, and then they'll start to merge together. Toothless and Hiccup theme is the best example, but it does happen a lot.
I agree. That's definitely one of my favorite things about the film, after doing a more in-depth study on it. I mean, not only does it have great themes, but the themes are very dynamic in the fact that they'll change keys, and it does it very well. It's not cheesy in a way like sometimes that can come across. It does a good job of mixing the themes, like you were saying, and overall, just even the instrumentation is really clever, like using some of the folk instruments. It really adds depth to the score.
The quality of the themes as well is just stunning. How many good themes you can sing to yourself, and it's one of the few soundtracks that I listen to that's just note perfect. There is a part in Down Dragon where there's a jump scare, and
that's right. Yeah, there's a little jump scare there that I thought was a little bit. Yeah, that's like my least favorite part.
Yeah. So you might turn the volume down a little, but other than that, like once the cue, talking about the original soundtrack, once you get to Forbidden Friendship, it's some of the finest music that I've heard in film. I consider it, along with Fellowship of the Ring and Titanic as one of the best scores written in the past 30 years. And you don't really think about it like that.
Yeah, I know you don't, because I was even talking to some family members about this film and talking about how much I love it and the score, and they were like, "What, really?" Like some people, I think a lot of people don't. I mean, I know it's had 3 movies, so it's been successful, but a lot of people don't really give this movie much clout. But I think it not only is the movie great, but the music is just fantastic in it.
We've discussed 2 other animated movies, Up and The Incredibles, and I myself am guilty of this, where you just think it's an animated kids movie, the music's going to be stupid and it's not going to be memorable, and yet it's not even How to Train Your Dragon. These have beautiful soundtracks, and they can get lost in the shuffle, and we hope to shed some light on, that these themes are actually really brilliant.
Yeah, they are really well crafted.
All right, Ian, that wraps up our podcast on How to Train Your Dragon. We hope that we could shed some light on how these themes are used and how theoretically, maybe you can start to do your own stuff with these themes. I'd like to shout out my YouTube channel. It's on music theory, and I break down some music themes a little more in depth than what we did here. And it's Orchestra Studio, ORCASTRA Studio. Ian, what you got?
My YouTube channel is just Ian O'Donnell, so just IAN and then ODONNELL. And you can find some music videos on there and some things breaking down themes and scores and things along those lines.
So if there's any topic that you'd like to hear from us in the future, maybe video games or movies or scores you want us to break down, search for us on Facebook. Just search Beyond the Music. Send us a message, post on the wall. Let us know what you want to think. Even if it's just a question, we can answer it on the show or something. And that's all we got for you. Come back next week for our next episode.